There are nights when the world seems to hold its breath, as if a hidden tone were stretched beneath streets and stars and every small thing. And in that hush, you can almost feel existence vibrating with a secret it never stops repeating. Only our attention forgets to hear it. The lamps hum with filaments. Your pulse writes a rhythm in the wrist. The wind drapes a long note across rooftops. And somewhere behind it, all lives a frequency so patient it outlasts weather, politics, and the mind's excuses, inviting whoever listens to step closer without fear. Call it the hidden frequency, a hush that organizes motion into pattern and pattern into meaning. The same insistence that teaches a string which notes are allowed and an atom which steps are legal. An etiquette older than law wrapped in numbers, so exact they become comfort. The ground itself throws a bass line through lightning's breath and clouds reply. The air answers with chords you only notice when machines learn to be shy, and stones hold shapes that bloom at certain pitches like flowers opening to darkness. Each detail, a hint that rhythm is not decoration, but scaffold. The first scientists of tone were not the ones with degrees, but the ones who stretched gut over wood and felt, by hand, where a note becomes honest. And the first conspiracy, if you need one, is simply this. Older rooms knew how to listen, and their makers folded that listening into temples, baths, caves, and courts, until sacred and practical were inseparable. Whispering galleries trade secrets across domes. Stairwells hum back a traveler's heel. Corridors lean together at one pitch and relax at others. And in these places, you realize architecture is the alphabet of attention. Later, chalk and vacuum replaced incense and echo, and light confessed it carried its own pulse. It could be counted like heartbeats, if the hands were steady enough. A confession that unlocked the atom's schedule and the star's lineage with embarrassing ease. Spectral lines were the first barcodes of heaven. Dark rails crossing rainbow rivers with the authority of signatures. And those rails taught anyone patient enough to measure that the smallest realm is not chaos, a ritual. A ritual measured in frequencies that refuse compromise. The world of the very small behaves as though it remembers two languages at once, wave and particle, ensemble and solitary. And when it moves through slits, it leaves a pattern behind that looks like interference to the eye and like courtesy to the ear. A reminder that observation is participation, not theft. Each repetition of this experiment returns like a refrain, telling you that reality keeps one rhythm when you leave it be, and another when you ask for its itinerary. And both are true enough to be useful if you respect the timing. On scales far larger than eyes are trained for, space itself rings when giants collide, a bell of curvature struck by the falling together of black holes, its tone recorded by lasers held as steady as a vow. And that recording is so delicate, it required cities of quiet to build. Even the silence had to be engineered. Walls to drink echoes, earth to shield whispers, angles chosen so footsteps would forget themselves, all to catch a wave older than any instrument pointed at it, a kindness from the universe rewarded by patience. The mind loves a plot, and the invisible attracts plots easily, so it is tempting to imagine that this hidden frequency belongs to a secret guild or a room behind a locked door. But the true intrigue is calmer. Coherence cannot be bullied and attention cannot be stolen, and both prefer hospitality to command. Those who tried to weaponize rhythm discovered instead that rhythm leaves when threatened, that runes deaden when shouted at, and that the only method that works across decades is care measured in repetition and mercy. Imagine a corridor at night in a laboratory cooled below ambition, the instruments wrapped in silvered pipes, and the lights down to keep the air still. And in one cabinet, a cavity waits for light to stand inside it, like a cord caught in a bottle. A thin arrangement of mirrors and emptiness, prepared to count time and colors. A technician arrives with the untheatrical grace of someone who knows which screw sings and which cable sulks, and breath slows until the room forgives the visitor, because forgiveness is the first calibration. Inside that cabinet, a photon may bounce 1,000,000 times between mirrors, polished until even atoms feel shy, and a sliver of matter may be coaxed to move in step with that caged light until the two share a story neither could tell alone. A duet recorded in the lazy handwriting of numbers. The numbers will later become plots and papers and arguments. But for now what matters is the seam in the air where the hum tightens, the gentle feeling that the room has become a string, and you are the finger counting frets without pressing too hard. Older stones knew this seam, and older hands tuned it with geometry and ritual, not because of mysticism, but because listening was cheaper than force and more reliable than luck. And those traditions survived conquests not as superstition, but as craft hidden in ceremonies. Under a chant lies a measured breath. Under a procession lies step length repeated. Under a bell lies a foundryman's arithmetic. And below all of it runs the same quiet pulse that later physics spelled with symbols. A pulse generous to anyone who keeps appointments. Even our mistakes have guided us toward better ears, teaching that noise is not only loudness, but misalignment, not only static, but arrogance, and that rooms, like people, become gentle when given a rhythm they can keep without injury. This is what the hidden frequency teaches on the first night of attendance. Slow down enough to meet a tone halfway, and it will carry you the rest of the distance. Pull too hard, and you will dampen the very wave you hope to ride. Resist for pride, and you will miss the simple invitation inside the complicated graph. We will follow that invitation across centuries and into leaf veins, through stone and cavity and sky, into the mathematics that scolded our metaphors, and the myths that preserved what equations forgot. Each step another note in a scale, larger than sleep and softer than advice, because this is a story you learn by listening. Somewhere ahead waits a room older than speech, and a signal newer than dawn. And between them stands only the habit of attention, which is a door you already know how to open. The path bends toward history, and then bends again toward the living. And each turn reveals that frequency is less a property than a relationship, a companionship running under everything that moves, which is why even rest becomes music when understood patiently. The oldest legend about frequencies begins in a forge where hammers told a mathematician that certain intervals soothed and others stirred, a story polished by centuries into myth while still pointing toward a sturdy truth. Proportions turn motion into harmony, and harmony carries memory across weather. Whether or not the blacksmith ever lectured a philosopher, The octave still doubled its way up ladders of string and pipe, and the fifth still bridged strangers into temporary choir, lessons that drifted into temples and city halls with the quiet confidence of self-evidence. Across the ocean of time, another harmony was discovered when equations joined electricity to magnetism, and light stepped forward as their child. A beam suddenly revealed as a wave riding fields that rode each other into being, and frequency became the bead counter that kept inventory. In gaslight-lit rooms, prisms peeled rainbow into narrow lines that cut across darkness like rails, and those spectral rails were proofs that atoms kept strict ledgers, allowing certain exchanges and forbidding others. A fiscal policy of the universe enforced not by violence, but by resonance. Heat misbehaved until a new staircase for energy was drawn, steps so specific that furnaces could only spend in packets. And that drawing changed our economy of thought with the same finality that coins replaced promises, ushering in a century where light behaved as both note and bead, depending on who asked and how politely. Orbits gave way to orbitals, circles to clouds, and the mind adjusted grammar as mathematics whispered that probability had shape and phase, and the change felt less like surrender and more like learning the local dialect of a city you have always loved. Architecture learned the same lessons without chalk, coaxing whispers from one wall to another over dizzying distances, teaching stone to stretch syllables into banners and domes, to pinch sound into corners where secrets went to swirl. And this craft became sacred, not because it promised magic, but because it delivered clarity. A doorway that boomed at one pitch and fell silent at another was more than decoration. It was a device teaching citizens that air has preferences and rooms have tempers, and builders learned to soothe both while pretending it was only ornament. Cymatics arrived as a toy and matured into a tutor, grains tracing nodal lines on plates, shaken by steady notes, their flowers forming and fading with a discipline as fussy as any choir rehearsal. Beauty emerging not as a gift, but as an agreement between force and boundary. It was easy to leap from these patterns to metaphysics, and tempting to sell them as proof that the universe had chosen your favorite number. But the more interesting truth was humbler. Given time and a steady push, matter arranges itself with grace, and grace prefers patience to mythology. Inside white rooms that never quite felt at home in daylight, cavities made of mirrors began to hold light long enough to treat a single photon as a guest rather than a rumor, and counters learned to tick not with gears, but with atoms, flipping between moods that no longer needed metaphor. These clocks grew so honest they could tell you that time runs slower on the floor and by the window, an impertinence that measured gravity by listening to ticks, and geography gained ears to map the invisible slopes along which seconds fall like rain. A mesh of radio dishes stretched over desert and mountain began listening for pulses so precise they humbled metronomes. Dead stars sweeping lighthouses of radiation across us, with an accuracy earned by collapse and spin, their pace slowed by gravity and distance into sonatas for software. Between these beats, a quieter light spread in all directions, the leftover glow of a violent simplicity, its mottled warmth carrying acoustic peaks that once rattled the plasma and now draw maps of a sky we inhabit like a fish in a lake of memory. Archivists played a different role in this conspiracy of listening, peeling tape from boxes, coaxing notes from forgotten blueprints, finding that even during decades of secrecy, craft had seeped into public work through patents and training manuals, and the stubborn decency of engineers. Hidden rooms with tuned walls became museums by accident, their geometries outliving the missions that funded them. And the fact that a whisper traveled better there than in other places was an inheritance you could test with a hum and a patient's watch, a test more democratic than any password. High above, arrays stared at patches of sky until structure congealed from noise. Filaments of galaxy clumping along threads like beads on a net. Voids as articulate as matter, an architecture of nothing supporting everything we count as something. And the revelation felt like hearing the bass line for the first time in a song you thought you knew. Each pattern carried a preferred scale, like a builder's secret span or a poet's favorite meter. And these preferences let predictions arrive on time, which is all any craft ever promises. Beneath the glass of laboratories, liquids learned to stand still, while crystals grew patient and light lost its hurry. And the first hints arrived that living systems sometimes cut themselves a deal with the small and strange, borrowing coherence for a heartbeat to turn waste into order more efficiently than warmth should allow. The notion felt like science fiction until spectra refused to be ordinary and signals outlived noise by a suspicious margin. And the suspicion grew into method the way winter resolves into spring for those who keep the firewood dry. What used to be a divide between stones and cells, between art and instrument, blurred until it was only a polite line on a map. And the line is where we will walk next, not to enforce difference, but to greet the handshake, because that is where the frequency shows its most generous face. There, in the chloroplast and the compass of a bird and the breathing of a city at midnight, the hidden tone announces itself not as omen but as craft, and craft is a friend that always arrives quietly. The air cools a degree, as if to signal a change of register, and a leaf turns imperceptibly toward a window you have not opened yet. And even without proof, you can tell the story is stepping across a threshold that feels familiar to hands and new to words. Inside a leaf's green interior, energy moves as if it had learned concert etiquette, slipping through molecular corridors, not as a series of blind collisions, but as a wave tasting all the paths at once, favoring the quickest like a traveler who hears the clearest echo and follows it. Chemists call these brief coherences by pragmatic names, measuring lifetimes in femtoseconds, and drawing maps that look more like subway diagrams than sonnets. Yet the performance remains, and the plant writes sugar from sunlight with a fluency that implies rhythm. High in sky and history, migrating birds read a map that our eyes cannot see, a silent field drawn by the planet's core. And one explanation persuades that their eyes host molecular pairs whose spins notice the fields, twist and whisper orientation into sensation. This radical pair story is delicate, interrupted by the wrong color and restored by the right, like a fugue you can spoil by slamming a door, and its plausibility rests on the same principle as every other scene in this tale. Frequency carried by coherence carries information honestly. A third rumor with respectable papers suggests noses might hear what they smell, that some scents are recognized by the way bonds vibrate, rather than only by shapes fitting pockets. An auditory metaphor smuggled into olfaction that insists on prudent caution and gentle curiosity. Evidence argues back and forth with admirable energy, and in that debate lives a reminder grown adults often forget. Not every melody is a symphony yet, and patience is not the same as credulity when the instrument is the world. Your own body draws circles on a clock that glows inside muscle and nerve, gene and gland. A chorus of cycles nested from seconds into seasons, all tuned by light's arrival and the meals you ask your system to count as true. When the timing drifts, the song does not stop. It only loses key, and that detuning reads out as moods and appetites and sleep that forgets to arrive, which is why the quiet technology of keeping a steady dusk and kind morning is more revolutionary than any slogan designed to sell urgency. Sound enters this home with a rite that predates argument. The slow drum of a walk evening out breath, a bowl's rising tone smoothing the mind into a shape that admits sleep, a binaural whisper persuading attention to loosen its grip on worry without breaking the hand that holds it. The very low notes under hearing, transmitted more by bone than air, can trouble rooms into anxiety or soothe them into vigilance. And the ethics of these frequencies deserves better shepherds than trends, because the nervous system listens even when we pretend not to. Patterns drawn by sand on metal plates under steady tones return here with their lesson intact. Order is the child of boundary and patience, and beauty appears as a side effect when force is kept honest by limits. There is no sacred number hidden in these spirals, except the ones we choose to bless with applause, and yet the practice of slowing a note until it becomes a partner to matter remains a sacrament that turns cynicism into the more economical craft of maintenance. Whispers leak from archives about rooms designed to persuade attention itself. Projects that hope to beam suggestion like a radio broadcast's weather reports. And although the boast rarely outlived the memo, the quiet learning did, that consent is coherence and coercion is noise, that rooms become brittle when obsessed with control, and that kindness produces signals measurable at scales both physiological and architectural. If there is a conspiracy entwined with this frequency, it is a conspiracy of caretaking disguised as logistics, and it survives because it feeds more than it takes. Builders with ears measure not only strength and cost, but also which materials prefer which tones, laying out floors that do not complain and walls that do not amplify unkindness, learning to quiet an airplane cabin without muting the sky, or to hush a hospital without silencing its necessary alarms. These choices, seldom celebrated, turn cities into instruments instead of engines, and the difference is felt first in the jaw and shoulders, then in the calendar, and in the rate at which tempers forget their excuses. Laboratories that tread gently have coaxed even chubby molecules into casting interference shadows, the kind of experiment that proves mischief survives scaling, and that matter does not surrender its ambiguity just because we look at it with proud eyes. Watching these giants behave like their nimble cousins suggests that the world's habits are consistent, not fragile, and that attention, if timed kindly, can draw out cooperation in places where force only multiplies error. A quieter moral sneaks out of a principle with a stern name. Measure too often, and the system refuses to change. Check a seedling's height every minute, and you bruise it into stillness. Interrogate a state without pause, and you pin it to a single answer it would have left behind if allowed. The timing of questions becomes as important as their content, and frequency is now both ruler and covenant, an agreement about cadence that turns curiosity into hospitality. What we call freedom may be nothing more or less than bandwidth room within a pattern for variation to matter without breaking the pattern. And that thought gentles both law and impulse, teaching that discipline without mercy is sterile, and indulgence without meter is waste. In this light, the hidden frequency seems less like a code to crack and more like an atmosphere to breathe. And breath, being older than words, teaches better than lectures when we insist on staying human. Ahead waits the territory where seconds are trapped and counted with such honesty that gravity blushes in confession, where crystals of time refuse ordinary rest, where signals from disasters become songs we can predict, and where even vacuuming nets it is not empty, and those rooms will ask for the same courtesy all the others did. Arrive on time, speak softly, and accept that what answers is not an explanation, but a demonstration waiting to be understood. Timekeeping improved by the surrender of romance. Pendulums ceded to quartz. Quartz bowed to atoms, and atoms now confess their transitions with such dignity that nations coordinate their days by listening to hyperfine whispers. A second is no longer a fraction of a planet's spin, but the counted steps of cesium, and the count is tidy enough to notice that seconds pass at different rates a stare apart, a precision that turned Einstein's poetry into engineering with results felt in maps, networks, and the gentle arrogance of satellites. In the refrigeration of ingenuity, another structure learned to argue with stasis. The time crystal, a system that cycles without spending itself, a choreography imposed by a periodic push that doubles the rhythm and refuses to settle into the obvious lull. These driven, non-equilibrium dancers obey, but differently, returning to the stage with every kick in a phase that dodges expectations, teaching that order can be drawn from insistence if the insistence is measured in beats instead of demands. Interpretations wrapped around quantum facts have become a literature of their own, less about solving than about phrasing, and whether you prefer the world branching into histories like frost on glass or waves agreeing to collapse when asked nicely, the experiments keep time with either story. Superposition remains an overlap of options that interfere until a measurement prunes them. Entanglement remains a correlation stronger than distance, that refuses to be a signal, yet refuses also to be coincidence. And the tune underneath stays playable regardless of lyric. Information theory sneaked into physics on quiet shoes and rearranged the furniture, declaring deletion sinful, copying illegal, and error correction, the virtue that keeps coherence alive in a universe that loves letters noise the way shorelines love storms. Codes layered on codes transform fragile bits into durable choirs, qubits arranged in lattice so that insults cancel and patterns persist. and the rate at which syndromes are diagnosed and healed becomes a frequency itself, a beat of redemption in a lab coat. The universe speaks more plainly through ruin than through order sometimes, and when black holes crash, they ring like bells whose pitches can be written before the event and confirmed after, a satisfaction both primal and statistical. The closing chords, the ring-down fit the theory's expectations as snugly as a well-made case. And that fit warmed a community that had grown wary of miracles, reminding them that prediction is not arrogance, but craft when earned by long, quiet work. Older by far is a glow that never dies, a blue-orange frost drenched on the inside of all directions, its wrinkles recording frozen sound from a time when matter and light were inseparable enough to gossip without friction. Those wrinkles plot into peaks at particular angles, like a drumhead with favorite modes, and decoding them taught us the universe's age, shape, and confidence interval. A feat accomplished by inflating balloons into telescopes and flying them above noise until silence answered with numbers. Not all silence comes from height. Some is carved by depth, and caverns under mountains have been annexed by a republic of detectors that mistrust cities and prefer rock. There, plates of metal feel a tug not from charge, but from vacuum's bookkeeping, the Casimir pressure squeezing emptiness into force by denying certain wavelengths the room to exist. A shy hand pressing between mirrors that reminds us nothing is never nothing, only a different card shuffled to the top of the deck. In the corner, where ambition and humility are temporarily reconciled, qubits are groomed like fragile singers, temperaments understood, entrances rehearsed, exits planned, and tantrums logged. Superconducting circuits need cold and quiet. Trapped ions need light like a surgeon's scalpel. Defect spins in diamond need darkness and a green whisper. And every platform measures success not only by speed or gate count, but by how long a tune can be held without wobble. An aesthetic standard sneaking into engineering disguised as a metric. The quantum Zeno effect sits here like a cone, suggesting that staring can be a cage, that attention applied too often becomes anesthesia, freezing evolution into a stutter. A warning relevant to any practice that confuses monitoring with progress. Sometimes the better experiment is fewer measurements spaced wisely, an arrangement that frees a system to travel its allotted arc without being pulled back to the starting line by concern labeled as diligence, a reminder that even curiosity should keep time. Night is the ally of such work, because the world sleeps badly, but better than it used to. And in that small reprieve, a lab becomes less haunted by elevators and neighbors. The mains quiet down, and the refrigerator's hum becomes a metronome rather than a tyrant. The operator chooses a window when the city's fever cools, cleans contacts and conscience, confirms the calendar of calibrations, and then brings the system to the brink, where a handshake between light and matter lasts long enough to be named. A ceremony without liturgy that still feels sacred. If there is wisdom to carry out of these cold rooms and into more human rooms, it is that precision softened by affection is stronger than precision hardened into pride, and that schedules kept for the sake of care rather than spectacle breed results that entertain both eye and instrument. The hidden frequency is not a password, but a relationship, and relationships are maintained by ordinary courtesies enacted reliably. An unromantic truth that turns out to be the most romantic of all when it begins to work. The last instrument powers down with a sigh that could be mistaken for relief, and the windows gray toward morning, and you realize that the universe's most generous habit is to keep time even when we forget to thank it, waiting only for the next listener to arrive without hurry. An hour before sunrise is the gentlest aisle in the day's cathedral, and if you rest here, with breath steady and lights low, the hidden frequency steps out from behind appliances and errands to sit nearby like an old friend who does not need to make a case. It hums in radiators, in the eyelids' drift, in the continent-sized pulse of the sea, and in the very vacuum that pretended to be empty for so long that we forgot to ask better questions. And it asks nothing except that you keep company without pretense. There are small rituals that invite this companionship without vanity, crafts simple enough to learn in a kitchen, and dignified enough to share with a child. And they begin with attention taught to keep a beat rather than to chase applause. Trace a shadow at the same hour each week, and watch the curve of the year write itself on paper. Turn a knob on a pocket radio and listen to stations thicken after dark as the sky grows more reflective. Hum along with the refrigerator until its pitch slides into your chest and breath finds it, small acts that build larger ears. Tune a bowl or a string until the beat between two tones slows and disappears, and feel how the room seems to lengthen as the warble fades. As if space prefers agreement to argument, a simple shift that leaves a fingerprint on your posture for hours. Find a corner where whispers travel farther and make it an altar to patience, not with incense, but with scheduled quiet. A place where you answer fewer messages and write more unshowy sentences, not because the world forbids noise, but because you prefer what grows in its absence. Become a steward of silence the way you would a garden, not to ban birds, but to welcome them, not to deny weather, but to arrange paths where it does less harm. And you will notice that other people's urgency loses its teeth when it enters your rooms, not because you overpower it, but because it dissolves into a larger rhythm. This is not withdrawal. It is tuning, and tuned spaces produce decisions that feed more bodies and break fewer cups, modest achievements that add up to a civilization when repeated across time. Let imagination join the practice without running the practice, a companion rather than a commander, and allow yourself a picture of the world at work elsewhere. Someone aligning lasers far away while the city sleeps. Someone measuring a leaf's coherent shimmer at noon. Someone drawing a line through data that will one day inform a bridge's foundations or a hospital's hum. None of them will knock at your door, and yet their care will arrive as calmer signals and kinder rooms. Proof that attention can be shared across distance without needing to be seized. Use the physics as company, not creed, reminding yourself that oceans ring at preferred periods and lull shores into habit, that mountains hum under strain in notes geologists can hear, that the sun sings in hidden ripples read by telescopes as surely as a violin reveals its wood by tone, and that your own clocks from cells to mind keep appointments best when light and dark are honored more than schedules. These are not commandments. They are manners, and manners turn survival into society when practiced kindly. If you hold a suspicion that everything meaningful has been hidden behind fees and passwords, let the daily, unpriced signals answer you. The way dawn arrives at a predictable angle on your floorboards. The way a kettle reaches the same note before it boils. The way a child's laugh becomes more regular when you match its tempo instead of outpacing it. All of it pointing toward abundance disguised as restraint. The hidden frequency has never belonged to a guild. It refuses membership, preferring invitations to credentials. There will be days when none of this persuades, and the room will not answer, and the mind will not quiet. And on those days the practice is to keep the appointment anyway, to sit with your imperfect attention the way a friend sits with grief, offering no fix, only time. Frequency is not charm but habit, and like any relationship, it survives on days when neither party is impressive. And to keep such company is an adulthood worth a quiet pride you never need to confess. If you are the kind to entertain visitations, consider that any intelligence gentle enough to care for coherence will prefer households where thresholds are treated with respect, where a door can stay on its latch without fear, where clocks are steady and conversations soft, and where noise is not a weapon, but a weather pattern folded into the day's design. Such a caller might bring nothing more than a silence that grows larger after they leave, and that would still be a gift in a century that mistakes volume for importance. The city will wake whether you approve or not. Engines will stack atop birds, screens will chase your eyes, and the mind will try to forget what listening taught. Yet the practice does not vanish when attention is pulled. It waits in your breath like a metronome under a song, ready to be felt again at the next red light or in the next hallway that learns your voice. Carrying the hidden frequency is no heavier than carrying posture, and posture becomes character when held long enough to be felt by others. Somewhere instrument powers up as yours powers down, and this leapfrogging of care across time zones and kitchens is the real conspiracy worth joining. A slow-motion relay of craft and kindness that teaches the world to hum with intolerances that leave room for surprise. You are invited to keep this pace, not as duty but as pleasure, a kind that draws sleep sooner and makes waking less brittle. A rhythm easy enough to remember the next time the kettle lifts its shy note. Before you drift into sleep, remember mystery is never truly lost, only waiting to be found. If you enjoyed this journey, subscribe for more relaxing ancient mysteries, and let your curiosity guide you deeper.